Hello and welcome to Identirati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. This is episode 184. And a quick logistical reminder, please follow us on LinkedIn. Help us get to 2,000 followers. The topic today is the intersection of IAM, AI, and Web3. And our guest today is Jeremy Wan, founder of SOT Security. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.
So before we dive in, Jeremy, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. I started my career long time back. Spent almost like a decade in consulting, kind of laser focused on the IAM and the IAM security part. And then after that, just because of the family reasons, that I jumped to the industry. Their IAM program from scratch, enterprise IAM program, and then was working a little bit in the Web3 industries as well. But right now, I'm just doing my independent consulting at this point.
And a member of ID Pro, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I think we were chatting on the ID Pro Slack, as you mentioned. And for anyone out there who doesn't know about ID Pro, it's an industry professional organization where professionals can exchange ideas and bounce ideas off other people who have been there, and is developing a great body of knowledge. So a lot of great work goes into ID Pro. But the topic today, as I mentioned, it's a word I haven't said in a long time, Web3, the intersection of identity and access management, artificial intelligence, and Web3. So let me just start there. What does Web3 mean today? And what's the best example of a working Web3 in production today that we can look at and say, this is actually potentially real?
Yeah, I think it's more real than lots of people realize. Especially, I think comparing to how people are adopting AI today. Apparently, like AI has a much higher adoption rate than Web3. Just in my assessment, right? But right now, like I think stable is definitely one of the use lots of people are start to get comfortable with and find this are useful, right? And I think just personally, right, the reason kind of draw me into Web3 was that I think there are definite part like when Bitcoin starts or different coin starts, right? But I think the most part is because I'm in the security industry, the technology of blockchain, right, to provide a transparency as well as being able to provide a trust, basically a tools for people to gain transparency and trust. That was basically the part for me kind of dig into this part, right?
It's funny because you said AI is it getting more adoption than Web3? And I just did a quick Google. I said, how many customers does ChatGPT have? And Gemini says ChatGPT has approximately 900 million weekly active users. The population is 6 billion. So it says it's the fastest growing application in history. So it seems like to even put Web3 and AI and talk about adoption, like these two things don't even belong in the same conversation. Anyway, let's dive into it. Let's explore it. And so I listed in the homework, and for those of you who don't know, we have a wiki page for every episode that lists some homework, some more reading you can do to find out about the topic. And there's the link. There's a short link for every episode. And I was reading a blog from Ernst & Young that's part of the homework. And And in one of the bullets, it basically talks about potentially using Web3 to help AI overcome its trust issues. Um, and I'm wondering, is that your idea? Like, what would this actually look like? Like, how would AI help, or how would Web3 help us overcome the trust issues of AI?
Yeah, I think we have to kind of look into, right, if we are looking from the sort of the IAM lens, right, sort of the different component of IAM, right? If we're start looking at the identity layer, right, you could have, like, I think DID and verifiable credentials, right, sort of utilize DID right now. And part can be, sort of the identity layer that we can keep that on chain, right, on the blockchain, right, and then move down to like authentication or authorization part, right? You could have like cryptographic cache, the current security policies, right? Just prove that the word, prove like the AI agent hasn't been tampered with, right? And then also you can also probably store knowledge proof, like of the logic, some of the mathematic proof that on chain as well, right? And also maybe a more forward-looking way is that I'm kind of looking into that these days, is that, right, in the traditional world, in the current world, right, the world of humans, right, we have TransUnion, Experian, and I think Equifax, right, sort of the big three of the credit score for humans, right? But when the AI agent that sort of being sort of abstract, I would say partial abstraction layer of a human, right? Because they do tasks on behalf of humans, right? So maybe a wide idea that I have is like, should we have a credit score system for agent as well, right, in the future, right? That's sort of things that I'm kind of digging into this area these days.
Yeah. So I'm going to sort of read from the EY blog, and I think this aligns with what you were saying about hashes. And the EY article says Web3 can help combat misinformation through blockchain notarization. Content developers can hash an article or video, essentially creating a digital fingerprint that is unique to any piece of content. Put the result on the blockchain and sign it with a public key. Um, so the idea is that these hashes are potentially good for publication on the blockchain because we can't have any PII on the blockchain because obviously blockchains are all public. So the best thing to put on blockchains is hashes or proofs. So if we go along with this, I guess my question would be, what would we actually put hashes of? Because the suggestion in that article of a, um, they say either a article or video or something, an
Mm-hmm.
article or video, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see how a hash of the article or video would help us here. What entities or what data do you think we need proofs of? And how would that actually enable more trust in transactions, in digital transactions, whether they're agentic or even on behalf of humans or what? I just can't connect the dots and say, what am I hashing? And how does that hash actually increase trust?
I think there are lots of things that you can basically utilize this features, right? And I think one of the things that you can do is to the way I'm thinking about this is like for security policies, right? Or some of the rules that you defined, or a plan, right? Like the task list or execution plan, right? So you can make a hash of that and just make sure that, right, when the agent, right, they execute this, right, so to prove the agent hasn't been tampered with, right? So that could be one of the use case, right? But I think there are some of the other, basically sort of the areas, right, like I think to validate against the data also did not get tamped with, right? So that could be another area, right? Very specific data that being accessed by the agent, right, or the human, right? So just make sure that that didn't get tampered as well. It could be some of the sort of the two categories of the sort of like data that I was looking into that, right, we could be potentially looking into do these hashes.
Okay. Just to be clear, that actually didn't answer my question, and I have no idea what data you would actually put on the. But let's just say we could hash the attestation of a certain entity. So I'm an agent. Here's my public key. Here's my metadata. And we take that and we hash it and we put it on the blockchain. So now maybe our agent can attest to verifiably this identity because somehow the client trusts it because it's on the blockchain. So my next question is, so let's just assume that there's something that you can, although I don't see it today, let's just assume you can hash something and that would help you build trust in a digital transaction. My next question is that it's not clear to me that a blockchain adds any value. Like that's one possible solution, but how is that solution any better than, let's say, having a trusted issuer and having the trusted issuer publish that hash or metadata? And so, when you say let's use blockchain, I'd have to know why blockchain and why not just put it in a database, because that would be a heck of a lot cheaper, and build an an API for it, or an MCP interface for it. Why do we think blockchain? What value does blockchain add?
Yeah, just come back to the way I'm seeing it is definitely the biggest benefit is transparency, right? That the sort of centralized way to implement, right? The example I was giving, right, is that your FICO score, when I say like transparent, like in a way that is transparency, some of the things, like the way that you're looking at like FICO score today, right? That, sorry, can you still hear me? Okay.
Yeah. You're good. I'm listening.
Okay. Right. So, right, if you're looking at the current like FICO score, right? So I think there are definitely reasons that you need sort of a privacy, right? There's definitely privacy reasons the data are not available, but that data is currently owned by a centralized organization, right? But if I have the ability to, but right, it's my personal data, right? Why the why there is a centralized organization that need to that very specific score, right? So sort of like in a way that we're talking about zero knowledge proof, right? Right. We're talking about a proof as long as, right, when something, let's say, hey, right, in the future, right, if the agent is going to buy something for me, right, that as long as there is a mechanism, there is a system solution can prove the human that the agent represent for that have the ability to buy that stuff, right? Then that transactions can be authorized, right?
So,
But well, yeah. So basically, I'm going to be more basically like it provide a way to be more transparent, right?
well, first of all, so I think what you're saying is there's a risk of being deplatformed if one company owns the infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
And that's not desirable. But with the exception, if you're talking about smart contracts, right? Because
Yeah.
Web3 doesn't just mean blockchain, it
Yeah.
sort of means smart contracts. And smart contracts, we're talking about Ethereum. Do you think
Yeah.
you could do Web3 on Bitcoin? I don't know that much about it. Is that even
Mm.
possible? Can you do Web3 on Bitcoin without smart contracts?
Uh, I think the technology. I think yeah. I think Web3 and even like some of the post quantum risk that has
Hmm.
been especially talked with with Bitcoin. I believe there's already some discussions around like update some of the algorithms of Bitcoin. So I would assume it's possible, but yeah, I haven't really dig into that part yet.
Yeah. Okay. Um, but that's really I just asked Gemini, can
Mm,
Web3 operate on Bitcoin without smart contracts? And it says yes, Web3 can operate on Bitcoin without complex Turing complete smart contracts using its native scripting capabilities. Blah blah blah. So I guess that sort of gets to my point. We were talking about deplatforming, the risk of being deplatformed.
mm,
Um, and Ethereum, in all likelihood, when you say Web3, we're probably talking about the Ethereum blockchain,
mm.
which has smart contract support.
Yeah.
Um, although that's not controlled by a single entity, in
Mm,
practice, a small number of large entities basically um, hold significant influence over its infrastructure and staking. Um,
yeah. Let me.
it's not like now I would
Mm,
say Bitcoin, I don't think that's true for. Bitcoin is truly decentralized.
mm,
Um, but every other one, and then once you drop off the Bitcoin um, Ethereum sort of cliff,
mm,
the blockchains start to get a lot smaller, or they're derivative, like Polygon, I guess, or I think that got their name right. They're a
yeah.
derivative off of Ethereum. They publish their blockchain to Ethereum. But I guess what I'm asking um, um, is this risk of deplatforming? I mean, there's no privacy implication. I mean, quite
So
the opposite. Everyone gets a copy of the whole ledger. So Bitcoin, terrible for privacy. Everything's in there. But the only advantage you would say is maybe because we have a decentralized writing algorithm,
mm,
we can't be deplatformed by anyone. So is that deplatforming risk so
so
high in
mm,
this trust ecosystem that it's worth the incredible amount of friction and developer bad tooling and
mm.
developer complexity and people using wallets and having to protect keys. So is it worth the for that risk of deplatforming to create the trust?
So,
Does it justify all the other negatives?
yeah, let me clarify what I right is that right. I believe right even in the way that I was describing right. I believe there will be organization to still being responsible to operate and maintain the infrastructures that support this new solution, right? But utilize the decentralized technology. But the part that should be fully closed, basically, they should have that even that company maintain the infrastructure, have zero visibilities into the actual like private data, right? But have a way to prove them, to generate the proof,
I assume
right?
that
And
the
that
proof
proof,
would be generated by the entity and then written to the blockchain. So neither the company, if I have write a simple API and I say post your proof and I'm going to return you back a number, and then anyone who queries that number will get back the proof. I have zero visibility into the data. All I have is the proof, the hash,
yep.
and there's no problem. The problem is that if you don't pay your bill, maybe I won't return your numbers. But there's no privacy implication there. I don't see your data at all. All I have is a list of your hashes, and so I don't agree that the publication of the hash requires that the company that's hosting that data see the data at all. I also have to say I don't really understand the use of decentralized here. Because to me, decentralized means we have a n number of autonomous domains collaborating in i.e. what we call the internet. The internet is decentralized. DNS is decentralized. The web is decentralized. Um, and so this definition of decentralized that you're using it seems to really ignore reality. How is the internet not decentralized?
So that right. So that's technology. So right, even in IAM, as you know, that we often have a debate of centralized, decentralized to do IAM solution. So, a bit as you said, right, there are definitely pros and cons on both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think what I was trying to kind of focus on is that right, we should only put the things that make sense to be decentralized, right, in a way that it can be verifiable, need to be public verified, right?
But publication on a blockchain is just one random, obscure, slow, high transaction, risky, not understood well by developers or the public way to publish it. There's a gazillion ways you could publish data on the internet, literally. Why can't I just throw up an API or an MCP server that returns information about hashes, and that would be publicly available?
Yeah, I think in right. So I think we're looking at like several things. If you're thinking a technical approach, right? I agree with you, right? From sort of the speed of processing data and compute the data, right? The centralized way is better for sure, right? But I think the blockchain, as I said, right, the value of blockchain, the trust ledger to transparency, right? So I think it's more used to solve the sort of business problems, right? Or process problems, right? In a sense of that, right? For example, like before, there was like, for example, a cross-border payment, right? You would need spend several days for clearing, spend several days for settlement, right? Right now, right, with the blockchain, right, because people knows that very specific transactions cannot be fungible, right? Basically, like non-fungible way that can trust us, right? So I'm just saying that in the AI world, right, think about that there are actually some new standards being kind of published, especially for like agent-to-agent payment world, that they cannot, right? They have to, because they're not humans, they cannot have a credit card, because when you apply, at least in the current in world, if you credit card, you need a driver license, or you're somewhat of a human, right? And then how, right, people sort of putting some trust into the agent, allow the agent to do the payment automatically on behalf of them, right? And is going to be able to make the payment. How it does agent A could trust the other agent, right, without, right, sacrifice the speed, right? Because, okay, right, if the agent is trusted that, okay, I'm going to make the payment, if the agent is not trust in at some level, right, I'm going to hold that transaction, right? And how can, I don't think the have kind of support that, right?
I'm just not buying any of this. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I have a hard time. When I think of trust, so I get stuck on the trust layer, because, like, ultimately, Glue is in the federation business. That means we create trust between domains, so we can have single sign-on, or so we can trust the authentication from one domain to another. And I agree with you that trust requires transparency. It's very important. But trust also requires risk management and accountability. And so let's just take your hypothetical and say that we're going to build some type of trust system on Ethereum using smart contracts. Okay? And so let's just take that. Okay, let me ask you a question about Ethereum. There was a hard fork of Ethereum recently, like within the last 2 years. When I say recently, who decides when a hard fork happens? How's that governed? And how many of your average developers understand the governance policies around the Ethereum blockchain? Is that actually transparent and well understood? Because trust is built when people understand things. And so, how transparent is this blockchain ecosystem in practice? And then let me raise one other question about smart contracts and trust. Most of us know that software needs to be updated. Smart contracts are immutable. So, how much trust am I going to have in a piece of software that can't be updated? And so I see that actually blockchain, my question, I guess, at the end of the day is, this all sounds great if trust is like a magic, like, paintbrush we can put over blockchain. But in practice, I would say blockchain is anything but transparent because people don't understand it. The smart contracts are clearly not very smart if they can't be updated and fixed if they're found to be insecure. And that actually what we have here is that we would build an extremely untrusted, untransparent system if we use blockchain anywhere in the solution around agentic security and federation. So it's a pretty broad indictment of like the whole idea of trust and blockchain being two words you could say in the same sentence.
Yeah, I think that the way that you describe the smart contract, right? I think it's I agree with you, right? The smart contract, first of all, that especially like in the sort of the A2A world, right? And you would have, I would imagine, like in the future, you would have lots of like smart contract. I think we call it as we can. I think there is definitely a balance, right? Whether you want to.
Or let me just clarify here. Web3 implies a series of web contract that determines how an organization is governed. So Web3, as I understand it, I am not an expert in this. Web3 is built on smart contracts, so that's why I was talking about smart contracts.
Yeah, I understand. Because right now there's even, I think you're right by like sort of how you interpret that, because right now there's Web4 that is sort of added the identity layer, Web5 with more stuff being added, right? But what I'm trying to say is like, right, I like to simplify stuff, right? Especially like right now we're looking into lots of new technologies, right? But if I'm only looking at smart contract part, as you're saying, right? For example, right, it's sort of like part of that for like for the IAM. So that's sort of the nature of the IAM, right? We have lots of great ideas, great technologies, architecture designs have been put out there to just the hallucinations of the IAM agent basically utilize backend logic or judgment of IAM. But each time, right, each time you execute a job, right, then you would ideally, as I said, that's what I'm saying, there was a balance, right? It's like, right, as I said, right, it's like, okay, I don't want to, if I have my agent is top my agent, maybe in one task, it would have 10 or 20 small tasks, right? And each task could have 5, 6 different steps, right? It's like how granular I want to say, all right, this plan or this task or this subtask, sub job needs to go as a smart contract, right? Because as I said, right, it's not realistic, right, to go that granular level, right? So basically, like, I think the point here is that's why I kind of frame this topic on the Web3, because I don't think Web3. I think Web3 would be the answer, right? But the existing IAM technologies and some of the evolving like technology or people are developing today from sort of a standard or right, I think it's going to be sort of being complementary on what the values can be provided by smart contract, provided by sort of the nature, basically the sole benefit of blockchain, right? Because, right, like, I think we were talking about lots of now, a database, especially from database side, from transparency. Another topic for the transparency side is that, right, there are lots of like, I think of vendors. I think it's not only IAM vendors, but I have been seeing a lot, right? They are moving towards like a graph-based database, right? So the way I think that from there is to basically because if you're doing a traditional like relationship based like SQL database, right, the cost is high, right? Trying to query, trying to make some real-time decisions, reasoning behind whether this user should or should not, based on what the what that user, right, whether it's actual human user or agent, right, whether that specific user, based on their intention, right, based on their goal, right, should or should not have the access, right. I think it's going to be a combination of this technology, different use case, right? Maybe there are 2B use cases to enterprise. Everything is going to be a little bit different. Every solution is going to be a little bit different, right? But I think from blockchain standpoint, right, I think the sort of the nature, as I said, right, the nature of the sort of the Web3 or blockchain world, right, it will be able to kind of provide infrastructure, right, for people to utilize, right, to give the trust at some level, is what I would think Web3 sort of fit into the whole picture, right?
Well, it would be fascinating if that turned out to be the case. I think one of the problems with blockchain in the technologies in the past is that there's been too much hype. And then when people actually try and do this stuff in the real world, it turns out that for one reason or another, it doesn't work because blockchains are too slow, or the gas fees
Yeah,
on the blockchain make it not make sense, or the
yeah, I
smart
agree with you.
contracts need to be updated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
I want to
Yeah,
read you this one. It's from that EY
yeah,
article. I want to read you this sentence. It's really like typical. They say the transformative potential of the intersection of AI and Web3 may lead to outcomes greater than their individual impacts. So it's saying somehow now AI had a huge impact. So let's call it 1,000. And so I guess if you can say if it has any impact at all, that statement might be true. But it seems like the question is not if the impact will be greater. I think the issue is, will it be material? Will it be a number so small in terms of increase that we barely even registers? Because at this point, with 900 million like ChatGPT users, are we talking about 4 users who use Web3 too for this couple of agents? I don't know.
yeah,
I would argue that
yeah. So,
actually
I agree.
Web3.
Mhm.
Um, Here's my last sort of jab at this whole idea.
Uh,
And
yeah,
sorry, I know you came here, and this is, I think office hours is good because it gives us a chance to flesh out ideas, and
yeah,
so entrepreneurs, founders are always the ones who don't listen to all the old curmudgeons who say no, it can't be done. Um,
mm,
but I was just at the MCP Dev Summit, and I would argue to you that Web3 has happened, but it's called AI. Because when the hype around Web3 was that this is going to be so big that it's going to be like the web. It's going to have a foundational impact. It's going to have an adoption rate like the web. And
mm,
something like that did happen, actually. Something happened with an even higher adoption rate than um, with the web itself, which
right.
was torrential.
Mm,
Um, but and that's called AI. I would say MCP. If I said MCP is Web3, I'd probably be more in the realm of reality than some obscure technology that nobody understands or knows how to use based on distributed ledgers and their unknown applications and many problems. Actually, is like the web.
okay. Yeah, I actually have a my own take of why MCP become a topic right now, right?
Mhm.
So, I think first of all, right, there are transformers, there are large language models, right, and as you know, and probably most people know, like the history of OpenAI, right? Or as a lab, and I think the way the ChatGPT, right, because that was more like end user facing sort of agent, right? That is sort of on the application layer. I think it was from my perspective, because it was able to kind of get lots of attractions, right? If you don't have applications, if you are only develop the infrastructures, operating systems, orchestration layers, right? You probably would not be able to raise money to just do more stuff that we are doing today relating to AI, right? So basically, I think that was a good strategy. Like, you run before you can walk, right? But right now, right, I think lots of people once like OpenClaw was released, right? Not directly, not directly related to MCP, but everybody suddenly started to realize, okay, yeah, we actually need agentic OS, right? Like we kind of jump ahead too fast to the application layer. Right now, lots of people would like, right? I think so. Like, I think there is a word called harness engineering these days, right? It's like, right, because like, okay, right, application developers, they're like, okay, API, I'm going to call the ARM. Yes, I can develop a very popular app. Sure, you can do that. From a technical standpoint, you can do that, right? But the thing is that the orchestration layer, right? I think both from enterprise use case, even, right? Because like OpenCloud was more like personal agent, right? Basically, like, I think the orchestration layer, even from personal standpoint, you also need that orchestration layer, right? So help you basically organize things better, right? And make things more organized, right? So I think back to the Web3 topic, right? I think Web3 right now, right? Agree with you, right? It's small. I think Web3 is sort of crypto world. I think lots of people have bad taste on Web3 was because of crypto, like the coin, right? Lots of people issuing coin, all this kind of stuff, right? But um, the percentage, even in the payment world, even in the financial world, right, is still a very tiny percentage of the whole world, right? The the growth is real, right? So I saw data that in the last probably 6-7 years, right? So the stablecoin supply was growing around more than, I think, 500x just in 7 years, right? So um so so my role, right, I tell you, like my role, like, especially like in my career, right, I set as more like architect, right? So that basically limit me. Basically, I keep telling myself is like be tool agnostic, be sometimes be technology agnostic, right? I'm only looking at, right, which use case would make sense to use what type of technology. With that being said, I'm not right. So I just want to say, like, I'm not saying, hey, right, Web3 is going to solve all the feel like Web3 is, especially blockchain, right? I'm not talking about like, I think blockchain is going to especially from the infrastructure layer, right? Especially the I say registry side, right? Because you have to think about this, right? I think in the enterprise world, right? If we are talking about internal, right? Because we deal as you know, like most of the IAM solutions that were able to, the vendors were able to get paid is to be right. So the I don't think the Web3 would be that useful, considering like how big and how useful in the enterprise world. But I really feel like that the DID stuff and some of the self-sovereign like identities, right, is something that at least I'm passionate about. The reason I'm saying that is that, right, they are basically, you are trading, for example, right, you have your data being owned not by yourself, but you're owned by several big tech companies, right? They are using your data to monetize for lots of different ways, right? The only thing you are getting back is that, for example, right, I can use some of their email service for free, right? That's a good thing, right? But was someone ever cost a piece of can I just get a small piece of the data? That can I get just a small piece of that? I don't know if anyone thought about that, right? Is that because, okay, you think of sovereign identity, you own your, right? Why there's no way for me as a data?
Well, I think this is a topic that would be really potentially discussed at IAW. Are you planning to attend IAW this year? The Internet Identity Workshop?
Not yet.
I think you get a lot of traction. You know, obviously, you can hear from this episode, I'm a Web3 sort of skeptic.
Yeah.
We were at Glue, we were interested in coming up with a Web3 idea a couple of years ago. We looked into it as a way to perhaps better fund open source software. Or better, a new way to license open source software, at least, let's say. But then became apparent that the friction is just too high, so we sort of backed off on our enthusiasm.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like friction, there's definitely friction. I 100% agree with what you say about the speed, right? Some of the other sort of this that element launch, right? Right. I think the part like is that the sorry, I think closed. So we can probably elaborate more later.
Yeah, I think IAW would be a good place to brainstorm this because, sometimes two great ideas come from different directions and do collide and create something greater or solve some intractable problem. So, despite my skepticism, I've been wrong about a ton of things, and who knows, maybe there is some way to use blockchain publication of hashes to increase trust, and maybe that's part of Agentic. Not only is there IAW a good place to talk about it, the day after IAW, there's the Agentic Identity Workshop. So IAW is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. AIW, Agent Identity Workshop, is on Friday. So if 3 days wasn't enough identity stuff to to get out of your system, there's now a fourth day that's really focused on AI identity challenges and authorization challenges. So I don't know. I hope that we see you or others who might be interested. Decentralization is always a theme at IAW. Self-sovereign identity, various types of strategies for DID methods, the advantages of using DIDs and DIDCOM for communication, These are all hot topics at IAW, and I would say almost half the sessions are devoted to this. And again, I might be a little bit curmudgeon-y here in that Glue is still very much in the federation world, and we are struggling to connect these decentralized domains using existing federation technology, and finding it quite challenging, to be honest. But yeah, let's continue this conversation. Jeremy, thank you so much for being a good sport while I hassled you about Web3 mercilessly.
Yep.
And oh, just a quick reminder, next episode, we had some scheduling snafus about identity office hours. Next episode, we're going to do an episode on GovOps. The title is From Golem to Murderbot, a discussion of MCP security, zero trust, and GovOps. It's going to be a catch-all. We're going to reference a little bit this talk I gave at MCP Summit last week, and probably diverge into all sorts of other topics on GovOps. Yeah, so please tune in with us on Thursday. Please don't forget to follow on LinkedIn or YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, please tune in and follow us. And with that, I will say, Jeremy, thank you so much. It's really been fun. And thank you, audience, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks. Bye.